Hello, I'm Lloyd Sederer, and I'm going to be speaking with you about 4 ways by which we can improve our health and mental health. I call these 4 secrets hiding in plain sight. And they're equally applicable to people we serve, patients, families, as well as to people we know and love, our families, our friends, our coworkers, even ourselves. First secret. Behavior serves a purpose. In 2001, Andrea Yates drowned her 5 children in the bathtub of her Texas home. Andrea Yates was a good mother. She was a nurse. She homeschooled her children. She was a devout Christian, and she was very ill. She had suffered from a chronic mood disorder, and at the time that she took the lives of her children, she was under a delusional notion driven by a postpartum psychosis. And she heard Satan say to her, if she takes the lives of her children right then and there, they'll go straight to heaven. And if she doesn't, they'll burn eternally in hell. Her behavior was very purposeful, as incomprehensible as it may seem, as reprehensible as it may seem. It served a purpose. And when we look at other mothers who've taken the lives of their children, we discover that they do so for altruistic reasons. Their behavior serves a purpose. And this is not just true of such a chilling example as this. It's true for many of the conditions that we work with, people with depression, other psychotic states, and people who surround us, where we see behaviors that perplex us, confound us, defy reason, seem contrary to a person's interest. Gambling, drug addiction, smoking, alcoholism. These are behaviors that confound us, and these are behaviors where we're apt to rush to judgment, to think, what's going on with this person, to raise our voices to them, to exhort them. Stop that, don't you know? It's killing you, it's ruining your relationships, as if they didn't know that. So that's a moment for us to take a deep breath, to pause, to wonder to ourselves and to inquire with those other people whose behaviors confuse us. How is this behavior serving you? It may not be serving them very well, it typically isn't, but it's the best that they can muster so far. And that's the first step with a person in our treatment for a therapeutic alliance, and it's the first step towards a conversation with someone we know and love. Behavior serves a purpose. That's the first secret, hiding in plain sight. The second secret, the power of attachment. What makes for a long and healthy life? So it's something that of interest to me, maybe of interest to you, and that's been a study that began in 1938. It's called the Harvard Study of Adult Development. And at that time, they recruited 268 undergraduates at Harvard College, all men, it was a men's school at that time, to follow them for the rest of their life. And that study has been going on to today through 4 generations, thousands and thousands of subjects, men and women asking the question, what makes for a long and healthy life? And you might think, well, these are privileged people by and large, so that it's fame and fortune that actually predicts a long and healthy life. But not so. That's not what they've discovered and rediscovered again and again through 4 generations. What predicts a long and healthy life are enduring, trustworthy relationships. Someone we can turn to, someone we can trust, someone we know that will be there for us when the going gets tough. That's the power of attachment. And what it means is we need to surround ourselves and help other people surround themselves with people who care about them, who are kind to them and whom they trust. And we have to help ourselves and other people stay away from people who hurt us physically and emotionally and destroy our lives. Power of attachment, that's the second secret, hiding in plain sight. The third secret. Here I'm going to tell you a story that's going to seem so preposterous that some of you are going to take out your smartphones and do a fact check as if you were at a Trump talk. But it's a true story, as preposterous as it is. And it has something, it's a story about standards of care, medical standards of care, which you know is a big thing nowadays. And the story goes back to 1700 BC, when an Egyptian physician wrote on papyrus what the proper care is of battlefield wounds. And he wrote, the physician should remove the debris, wash gently with water, and cover for natural healing. A gentle, less is more approach to wound care, to taking care of the patient, the wounded patient. And that standard of care prevailed for almost 3,000 years until something changed. And what changed was that mankind invented gunpowder. And gunpowder led, of course, to changes in weaponry. And within a few hundred years, the principal wounds on the battlefield were gunshot wounds. And the standard of care for battlefield surgeons in responding to a gunshot wound was to pour boiling oil onto the wound. Boiling oil onto the wound. Now these wounds got infected, and there was a theory that by pouring boiling oil onto the wound, it would prevent infection. But of course, this was disastrous, and this calamitous intervention yet persisted for 200 years, despite all of the horror that it created. Imagine being a soldier, shot. You face a tough choice: die in peace, or maybe have the surgeon pour oil on your wound. And it persisted for 200 years until in the 16th century, a French surgeon ran out of oil on the battlefield. So what did he do? Well, he removed the debris, he washed with some innocuous fluid, and he covered for natural healing, restoring that standard of gentle, less is more. So why am I telling you this story? Well, it's a metaphor. It's a metaphor not just for battlefield wounds, but it's a metaphor for psychic wounds. And it reminds us that sometimes our best intentions, when we are trying to do more, and so we intensify the treatment, and this applies equally to therapies as well as medications. We do more particularly of the same thing. And that often produces effects contrary to what we want, or side effects or other problems, not really helping the person we're trying to help. Intensive therapies every day, evocative, explorative, group therapies that are confrontative, family meetings that are blaming and judgmental. And the same applies with medications. Doctors, well-intended doctors, they see their patient not getting better, so what do? They raise the dose of medication. They raise it again, sometimes to industrial strength doses of medication. Or polypharmacy, add a different medication, and seldom does that work. Once in a while it does, but seldom does it work. These intensive treatments tend to produce more harm than good, and they've led us and point the way, actually, particularly for very ill patients, people with vulnerable egos, to take a gentle, practical, problem-solving approach, skill building, school, working with families, a gentle, less is more approach to people with, particularly with serious mental illness and vulnerable conditions. As a rule, less is more. That's the third secret, hiding in plain sight. The fourth secret applies to an experience that I had about 5 years ago. So my employer, New York State, discovered it could save money by changing the insurance companies it did business with. So I got a letter in the mail saying I had to change my insurance company because the one that I had was no longer covered by the state. I didn't want to change my insurance company. I certainly didn't want to change my primary care doctor, whom I liked. But you know, with all this monkey business with insurance and networks, I had to find a new primary care doctor. It was really hard. I'm a doctor, you think, well, he could find one. I could not find a primary care doctor. How many of you have tried to find a primary care doctor? It's really hard. So word got around. I was also trying to find somebody at Columbia Presbyterian. I had a lot of colleagues there. I did a lot of work there. It was a convenience and professional thing. I could not get into one of the faculty practices, and word got around, and I got a call from the associate chief of medicine, and in large departments like that, the associate chief is the clinical director of the program, runs the practices. And I think she took pity on me. Maybe she felt a little ashamed of her practices. I mean, I'm a difficult person. Ask a number of people here, they'll testify to that, but I'm not that difficult. But I just could not. So she called me and she said, if you want, I'll be your doctor. I thought, wow, okay. So I go to my first appointment and enter her consulting room, and instead of her sitting there, typing into a computer, giving me forms to fill out, asking me about my symptoms, she turns to me and she says, what are the goals for your health? What are the goals for your health? And I thought, geez, I am really in the right place. I've got the right doctor here. I didn't expect this question, but I had thought about this matter, and I said I have two goals for my health. The first is I want to reduce the chronic inflammation in my body, and second, I want to increase my immune competence. Decrease chronic inflammation, increase immune competence. She was bemused by this response, and she turns out she's a rheumatologist, so she knew a ton more than I did about inflammation and immunity, but she said, oh, tell me more. So I proceeded, and I said, well, we've learned that there's a big difference between acute inflammation and chronic inflammation. Acute inflammation, that's a good thing. Promotes wound healing, prevents infection, it's adaptive, it's a good thing. But what happens when acute inflammation does not subside? That becomes chronic inflammation, often induced by stress, by trauma. And chronic inflammation, that's a bad thing. Chronic inflammation lays down those nasty fatty plaques in our cardiac and cerebral arteries, putting us at greater risk for heart attack and stroke. Chronic inflammation eats away at the beta cells in our pancreas, producing insulin insensitivity and putting us on the road to diabetes. And chronic inflammation produces a steady flow of cortisol, the stress hormone. And cortisol impairs our immunity. It gets in the way of T cells and natural killer cells doing their job, which means not only are we apt to get more colds, we're much more prone to get cancer. And it's also now been demonstrated again and again that chronic inflammation is associated with a lot of the diseases we take care of: depression, PTSD, schizophrenia. And chronic inflammation is associated with many of the diseases of aging: heart disease, stroke, osteoporosis, dementia. Chronic inflammation, that's the enemy. And it's an enemy that we can do battle with. And we don't have to use boiling oil either. There are 5 things that we can do to allow us to have the big lives that we want, which are going to put us more prone to stress and inflammation. 5 things that can make a difference. First, our bodies don't really like processed foods, and our bodies don't like sugary beverages or too many French fries. Our bodies like fish and vegetables, Mediterranean diet. Second, our bodies like exercise. 10,000 steps a day, maybe a little bit more, but start with 10,000 steps a day. You don't have to go to SoulCycle. You don't have to find some merciless trainer who's more apt to kill you than help you. And I've discovered, actually it sounds like a lot of steps, but you can get there just simply by, like me, by pacing all the time, pacing in your office when you're on endless phone calls. You can get to 10,000 steps a day. Our bodies like sleep. Sleep is restorative, 7 hours of sleep for adults. Our bodies like relationships, kindly, caring relationships, people who care about us and whom we care about, and they really don't like people who are mean to us. And last, our bodies like any number of mind-body interventions, yoga, meditation, mindfulness, slow or yogic breathing. All of these, nutrition, exercise, sleep, relationships, mind-body interventions, these are the ways that we can have the full lives that we want and counter the tendency to have chronic inflammation and all of its consequences. Chronic inflammation, chronic stress, that's the enemy. That's the fourth secret, hiding in plain sight. So in closing, I believe we humans are blessed. We're blessed with what's called resilience. We can make new neurons in our brain, neurogenesis. We didn't used to believe that. And in my work in New York City and New York State, I've led a variety of difficult post-disaster mental health responses after 9/11, after Hurricane Sandy, which was greater in its magnitude than Katrina. And I witnessed again and again how resilient people are, how people can rebuild their lives and rebuild their neighborhoods. We are a resilient species, but it doesn't happen naturally. It doesn't happen automatically. It takes work. And these secrets, I hope, point to some ways towards that kind of work, enable us to have the big, robust lives that we want. Behavior serves a purpose, the power of attachment, as a rule, less is more, and chronic stress, chronic inflammation, that's the enemy. And all of these are ways to improve our health and mental health that you can act on right now. And they're free. And I hope that they're useful to you. Thank you very much.